Okay, okay. You can cook in a real way. Um, you can drive places. You can go places, right? It's very much like a normal day, except that it's the moed of the Chag, in which case we want to treat it with special honor. So the rabbis are dealing with what are the limitations to this period. What should we do? So I'm going to go ahead and hold on. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And perfect. All right. All right. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Genius. All right. Test the first Zoom test. So Shmuel has taught earlier, and this doesn't really have to do with what we're going to get to, but just so that we understand where we're coming into the conversation, Shmuel has taught that one can betroth someone on these festival days, but they can't marry her because we don't believe in changing status radically, but there is something important about betrothing, and we're going to see why. So I'm looking around. Is there someone who would like to read? Go for it, Maddie. Thank you so much. I can't see him. Just scrolling through. Perfect.
I'm going to read it from my text here.
Perfect.
The Gemara offers another support for Shmuel. Come and hear that which a sage of the school of Shmuel taught in the following Barata. One may betroth a woman on the intermediate days of a festival, but he may not marry her, nor may he make a betrothal feast, nor may he perform levirate marriage, because that would be a joyous occasion for him. And one may not mix the joy of a wedding with the joy of the festival. The Gemara concludes, learn from this a support for Shmuel's opinion. The Gemara raises a question about the ruling itself. And did Shmuel actually say that we are concerned that perhaps another man will come and betroth the woman first? But didn't Rav Yehuda say that Shmuel said, every day a divine voice issues forth and says, the daughters of so-and-so is destined to be the wife of so-and-so. The field of so-and-so will belong to so-and-so. If this is the case, why should one be concerned lest another betroth her first? It is predestined that he will marry his designated mate.
Okay, I'm going to pause here and just jump in. Okay. Thank you so much, Maddie. It works slightly less well on Zoom than it does in real life, where you can say, like, I'm just going to jump in really quickly. Thank you. Maddie, I'm going to ask you to go back to it in just a moment. But I just want to pause here because I want to just reflect together. Shmuel has a concern. The concern is that in betrothing and getting married to somebody on the Chag, the joy of that marriage, the joy of finding your partner and getting to build your life together would supersede the festival. And we don't want anyone to have a joy that's greater than the festival. We don't want anyone to have an experience that's more than the festival. The festival joy is what we want to be focusing on. So any of that is problematic. But the Gemara is asking a question here, which is like, hold up a second. Why are you saying it's permissible to betroth a woman on the festival? We know you can't get married. You can't pursue your own individual joy on the Chag because that will supersede the communal joy of the Chag. Why are you allowing this, Shmuel? I don't understand. And he's saying, well, maybe the reason that Shmuel's allowing for betrothal is that he's worried somebody else is going to partner up. And that if you don't do this right away, you're going to lose your chance at happiness. And now he's asking the question, hold up. We have a teaching that there's a divine voice that literally calls out when you are coming into this world and says who your partner is going to be. If that's the case, how is it possible you could miss her by not betrothing her soon enough? If God is on top of this, then God is on top of this, and then you don't have to be. So what's the concern here? Is God in control? Is God not in control? You can't have it both ways. So this is where it gets really, really interesting. And Maddie, I'm hoping you're reading because the question is right. The underhanded question of the Gemara is, wait, is it possible that God isn't really in control of this? That God wouldn't be able to make what God's will is happen? So Maddie, if you'll just keep going. Thank you.
I think we would rather Shmuel's statement should be understood as follows.
Yes, exactly.
Perhaps another man will come. Is that where I am?
Exactly.
Okay. Perhaps another man will come and betroth her first by means of praying for divine mercy. In other words, Shmuel is concerned that the rival may beseech God to cancel the decree of the divine voice, and therefore the first man needs to hurry and betroth the woman before the other one has a chance to pray that he should take her from him.
I'm going to
This
pause
is like,
here. I can
sounds
jump
kind
in
of,
one more time because this is just totally wild. Sorry, Maddie, I keep interrupting, but I want to just pause here and dwell on this because this is so radically cool. It's not that we don't believe that God is in control. There's this idea that actually people's prayers have different powers. And that somebody might be able to pray with such an intention and with such, which what we call kavana being, the kaven is to direct, to be oriented in a particular way, that their heart might be oriented in such a strong way, that their soul might be oriented in such a strong way, that their prayers would get to God and would sway God in a way that this original person's prayers aren't able to do. And so there could be a situation in which you are out prayed, which is just so interesting to think about, right? Like that this Gemara believes that prayers are ultimately deeply, deeply, deeply powerful. And not everyone's prayers are the same level of power. So there is a world in which your prayers can affect the way that life turns out, but it could happen in strange ways. So I just want to pause here. I'm going to stop the share. And I want to ask you, do you buy this? Do you believe that different people have different powers of prayers? Do you find this to be interesting, or are you just totally bored? Like, what? I'm seeing all of the empty screens here. So have I bored you yet? Or does this seem interesting and reasonable? Go for it, Paul. And then we'll have John. Yes.
I'm going to get in trouble immediately.
Excellent.
Yeah, I don't believe any of this. I don't believe in predetermination. The Protestant church had a terrible problem with predetermination. I don't believe that one group of people has more powerful prayer than another group. In fact, I'll be frank, I rarely pray even when I'm in temple. I read the Siddur and I say to myself, this is really interesting. These people had an unbelievable insight into the human psyche, whoever wrote this.
Mm-hmm.
And it's humans who wrote it. I don't believe God did it or anything like that. So I'll stop right there.
So Paul, what I'm hearing you say is like, I don't buy. I totally don't buy. I don't buy that God is in control of this whole world. I don't buy that prayer has any effect. But that you do.
No. Prayer has an effect on the person who's praying, and it changes the perception of what may be going on in that person's mind. But beyond that, no.
Okay. When you read this text, in the way that you read the Siddur, what do you think is the reason this text exists? Because I think there are plenty of people in the tradition that are with you. So what is the teaching of this text according to your experience?
People require guidance. The world can be very wonderful and it can be very difficult. Averaging it out, there's a lot of difficulty with a lot of joy. And when the joy is gone or dissipates, then you need further guidance.
Okay. John, we're going to come to you. How is this text? Oh, you're wiped out. Were you going to be on the Paul camp? Totally on the Paul camp. Okay. We got a lot of support for there's no predetermination. Prayer is powerful on the person, but not on the other. This is great. Any other thoughts here about this text or about the idea that somebody could out-pray you, that prayers are not only powerful, but they can radically shape the world? This is not striking anyone's fancy. Okay, we're going to keep going. Maddie, we're going to read, if you won't mind reading, we're going to keep going with this story. There's another wild bit, and then we're going to go to a different text. Great.
I think Linda Leffert had her hand up.
Oh, go for it, Linda.
I just have a general problem with believing and anything that's that specific, that presumably, came down from God, thinking about what could happen between the betrothal and the wedding, and I mean, as far as, you don't want to interfere, the festival comes first, and that's that, it says fine. But the level of detail in the text, after reading it a while, I have to say it's very irreverent. I thought, like, you've got to be kidding. And that we should, most of us know this, as a young person, you go to shul, and you meet someone you love. I don't have to tell you, it was more recent for you than for some of us. And I don't want to be too personal, but like, it even, someone like you, or a rabbi who knew all of this, have this in your head when you and Solomon were thinking of, when are we going to get betrothed? When are we going to get married? Make sure it's not like in between that somebody may come. I just have trouble with that level of detail coming from God or a scribe or anybody else.
That's so interesting. I mean, I think I totally hear you. One of the reasons I brought this text is because when I was doing the Daf Yomi cycle, it stuck out for me in such a powerful way, because the idea was like wild to me, that somebody could out pray you, like that somebody's prayer could be so strong it would actually outweigh God's preference was radical to me. And that's certainly not a way. I've experienced prayer as being powerful. I haven't experienced to this point prayer being able to radically upset what's meant to happen on this earth, right? Like that it's not. Rabbi Kushner talks about like a vending machine God. Prayer isn't something that you just like put your coins in and get the outcome that you want. That's not how I've experienced. I mean, maybe someday I'll get to the point where my prayers are so strong that I can make anything I want happen. But until that point, that's not a place I live. So I found it to be kind of radical in that way, and like a wild take. And it makes me wonder, like, what happens in that worldview? Because right, that worldview has a positive, which is, wow, you believe that your prayer is so powerful, and certainly that would be a powerful motivator to pray, right? If you believe that your prayers can shape the world, then how could you skip any prayer? I mean, you'd be in it. But what happens to your faith if that's your belief about prayer, that prayer is ultimately powerful, that prayer can shape the world, and you pray and things don't shake out the way that you want them to? So let's keep going. Maddie, if you wouldn't mind reading, we're going to keep reading about another strange situation of someone who prays in the wrong way.
This is like this incident in which Rava heard of a certain man asking for mercy, that is, praying, who said, "Grant me so-and-so as a wife." Rava said to him, "Do not pray and ask for mercy in this way. If she is fit for you, and it has been decreed that she will be your wife, she will not go away from you. And if she is not destined to be your wife, you will come to deny the Lord when you see that your prayer is not answered." After the man married this woman, Rava heard him say in prayer, "Please either let him die before her or let her die before him." He was speaking about himself and his wife because he had grown to hate her so much. Rava said to him, "Did I not say to you not to pray for this matter?" Rav said in the name of Rabbi Reuven ben Itzerobeli as follows: "From the Torah and from the prophets and from the writings, it implies that the decree that a specific woman is destined to be married to a specific man is from God. From where is this derived? It is from the Torah, as it is written. Then Laban and Bethuel answered and said, 'The thing comes from the Lord. We cannot speak to you either bad or good.' From the prophets, as it is written, but his father and his mother knew not what it was of the Lord. From the writings, as it is written, house and riches are the inheritance of fathers, but a prudent woman is from the Lord."
I'm going to pop in here. Thank you so much, Maddie. I'm looking at the clock and realizing we're not going to make it through all the sources, so we're going to pause here. But this is such a wild thing. So we have Rava, who comes across a guy who prayed to marry this woman, who turns out not to be somebody that makes him happy, and now he is miserable in his marriage, and now he's praying that one of them should die, which is drastic. And Rava's response isn't, you jerk, how dare you pray for one of you to die? That's a terrible thing. Go to couples counseling, figure out a way to solve your marriage, but don't pray for one of you to die. That's just not the right answer. He says, didn't I tell you not to pray for this? Which again undermines this incredible, all of the rabbis in this sugya are coming at this with this belief that prayer is powerful, that prayer shapes the world around us, that prayer is a game changer, which is something that I think for most of us feels like another alien culture world, right? This is not the world that we live in, but a radical, interesting read. So we're gonna pivot here because I want to go back to a text that I think is closer in many ways to how most of us are experiencing prayer. I think most of us do not live in this world of the rabbis where you pray and your will comes true above and beyond God's, or where your prayer could actually cause you to be in a moment of misery. By the way, there's also a teaching, it's important to mention here, that when you pray, you're not supposed to pray for new realities for yourself. You're only supposed to pray for other people. And part of the reasoning, I think, is this idea that you don't want to run out on your faith, that you don't want to set up a prayer situation where you ask God for something and God doesn't give it to you and then you feel angry at God. But if you're praying for other people, you're less attached to the result and it's more altruistic, and so your prayer standing is going farther. We're going to go to a sugya now that's in the beginning of Brachot. And the question that's being asked is, how do we know that God prays? Which is just kind of a radical, we're in the middle of discussion of blessings and prayer and connection. And then there's this obvious, like, obviously God prays. How do we know? So it's going to go through it. It's going to be very interesting to see the prayer. So I'm looking, is there somebody else who would like to read and be interrupted regularly on, on a Zoom basis? This beginning part of Brachot.
I'm really happy to read.
Amazing, Annette, thank you so much. So I'm going to share my screen, and Annette, if you'll start with the Brachot text.
One second. One of the problems is everybody's, okay. Along the same lines, Rabbi Yochanan said in the name of Rabbi Yossi, from where is it derived that the Holy One, blessed be he, prays? As it is stated, I will bring them to my holy mountain and make them joyful in the house of my prayer. The verse does not say the house of their prayer, but rather the house of my prayer. From here we see that the Holy One, blessed be he, prays. The Gemara asks, what does God pray? Rav Zutra Batovia said that Rav said, God says, may it be my will that my mercy will overcome my anger towards Israel for their transgressions. And may my mercy prevail over my other attributes through which Israel is punished. And may I conduct myself toward my children, Israel, with the attribute of mercy. And may I enter before them beyond the letter of the law.
Perfect.
Okay.
Perfect. Amen, amen. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So we have this interesting thing. How do we know that God prays? Because God says, I will bring them to my holy mountain and make them joyful in the house of my prayer. The rabbis are reading this very closely. If God has a holy mountain where is the house of God's prayer, then God must pray. And so then they ask the question, like, okay, what does God say? How would you characterize this prayer? Please feel free to unmute and share. How would you characterize this prayer of God? What kind of a prayer is this? Paul, I would think this prayer would make you very happy. It's a prayer that's just about, right, helping me to be a better human, helping to affect an emotional change in me, but not to affect a change necessarily in the world outside. And it's a little hard for me. I'm gonna share. Any thoughts on this? Had you seen this text before? Is this interesting? Is this just totally irrelevant? Where is everyone on this?
Well, Aliza, I actually read my prayer differently. I didn't read it as my praying. I read it as prayers related to God, not but to the house where people would pray to me, to God, so I'm having trouble with what you're saying.
Got it. You read it as, this is the place where people pray to me, God.
Yes.
And how do you understand the rabbis? Because, and this is, I think, a tweak of the rabbis. The rabbis are reading it that God, in order for the rabbis' take to make sense, they're going through and saying, I see this verse where it says, my house, my prayer. What does that mean? It must mean God's praise. Here's what God prays. That's why they follow it up with God's prayer. It's kind of a radical read. The rabbis are, again, forcing this into a more prayerful space.
I just can't go there.
Go there. I hear you. I hear you. It's so radically different. By the way, there are also sugyot, really interesting sugyot, where the rabbis not only have God praying, but have God putting on shtreimels and tefillin and talis and really, really davening in the way that we do. And there's a whole thing to read, like, why is it that we want God to be like us? But I always want to come back to God's prayer. Is that a prayer that feels relevant that you would want to say? John, I see you talking. If you'll unmute, I would love to hear.
God is saying this supposedly, not us. Why would we want to pray that what God says? I mean, it would be very nice if God is merciful and doesn't take out vengeance for all our transgressions. But that's not what this prayer is supposedly about. It's supposedly God questioning himself. And as Paul said, I think prayer can have an effect on us, depending on our beliefs, but not an external effect. But this is one where God is trying to affect himself or herself. I'm not sure which.
And so in that vein, that feels like an experience of prayer that's closer to what we've come to encounter, and maybe a modified prayer of something that we might offer. And then I'm going to ask you to keep going. I'm going to pull this back up, and we're going to continue on in this text.
Similarly, it was taught in a Barata that Rabbi Yishmael ben Elisha, the high priest, said, once in Yom Kippur, I entered the innermost sanctum, the Holy of Holies, to offer incense. And in a vision, I saw Akatriel Yah, the Lord of hosts, one of the names of God expressing his ultimate authority, seated upon a high and exalted throne. And he said to me, Yishmael, my son, bless me. I said to him the prayer that God prays. May it be your will that your mercy overcome your anger, and may your mercy prevail over your other over your other attributes. And may you act toward your children with the attribute of mercy. And may you enter before them beyond the letter of the law. The Holy One, blessed be he, nodded his head and accepted the blessing. This event teaches.
I'm going to cut us off just for a moment, because this is just a radically interesting moment. So now we're off of God's mountain, and we're going to see a priest going into the Holy of Holies. Now remember, we know this from Yom Kippur. When you go into the Holy of Holies, you come face to face with God. We know this because the high priest has to tie a rope around his belly, because if God does not like his appearing, God can kill him, and then he can come out. He has to be pulled out because nobody else can dare to go in. So he goes in and he finds a Katriel Yah, which is a name of God, who's the Lord of all the hosts, who is sort of the driving force behind the universe. And a Katriel Yah is saying, bless me. And now this is much closer to your original thing, which is not that God prays on God's mountain, but that God is sitting there saying, please bless me, like, give me praise, give me blessings. That's my fuel. I need that in order to be myself. And the priest gives God the blessing. Now, the blessing is exactly the same blessing that God offered to God's self. So clearly the rabbis are on a similar wavelength. And the God hears this blessing, and there's this read in it also, which is like, what blessing could I, a lowly human, offer God that would be meaningful? And in this way, right? God, it's not just that God is like, please bless me. God's like, yeah, this was an epic blessing. Thanks so much. I'm feeling myself fueling up from these words. So Annette, if you'll keep going, and we're going to go in this, they're going to take this to a different teaching, and they're going to say, this is a teaching for all of us. It's not just about God and the Holy of Holies. This is a teaching that all of us can work with. So if you'll keep going.
And may your mercy prevail over your other attributes. And may you act toward your children with the attribute of mercy. And may you enter before them beyond the letter of the law. The Holy One, blessed be he, nodded his head and accepted the blessing. This event teaches us that you should not take the blessing of an ordinary person lightly. If God asked for and accepted a man's blessing, all the more so that a man must value the blessing of another man.
So radical. So what do we learn from this? What's the moral of this story? And do we buy this teaching? Feels like this is like a totally, I'm like watching everyone's faces. It feels like this is just like, meh, this is like weird. Why do we have this? I don't buy prayers of ordinary people. Prayers don't really do that. Can I hear some voices for where you're at on these texts? Go for it, John. And then Linda, perfect.
What this says to me is there's a reciprocity between humans and God. And in many ways, it goes to my thought that God is a creation of humans, something we need, and that we are tied together that way, not that there's some divine determinant force, but that we would all love one, such as that.
Mm-hmm.
This is says basically we can bless God, God can bless us, that we are dependent on each other in many ways for existence and perhaps for mercy.
It's a beautiful read. So it's not just that God created the world, but that humans created God. We're co-creative agents together, and we prop each other up and need each other. Linda.
I just feel that when it gets that specific, I just have a problem with it in general. I have an easier time, accepting, relatively broad principles and ideals about, ways, especially religious things, et cetera, et cetera. But when it gets that specific and it supposedly comes from God, I just have a problem with that concept that even a celestial being, thought about, you can, like what we discussed with, you can get engaged, but you can't get married because there's the holiday and and you might have I've never been a student of it, frankly, beyond Hebrew school. But after a while, I tried to sort of make sense of it, a lot of it. And I thought, maybe I just don't have the background for it. But I just have a little bit of a problem with that degree of specificity rather than this particular sentence.
Linda, is it the specificity, or is it the idea that God operates in this way?
Well, I feel more like, the previous person who said people need, a sense of God, need, if they want to try to be moral and good and nobody feels like doing it the right thing all the time, that there's, something good and important and, people have striven for throughout recorded history in lots of different ways to try to make sense of the world other than depending totally on their group or on humans. So But once it gets that specific, it kind of loses me at a point.
I hear you. I hear you. Well, I want to tell you all a story because one of the things that's so interesting for me, and I think my experience of prayer and my experience of how God can be in instances of prayer has really been profoundly shaped, not just by Jewish sources, but particularly by my experience outside of the Jewish community. And I did a unit of chaplaincy training at Mass General here in Boston. And one of the interesting things about being a chaplain in training is they kind of deputize you to be a prayer of all faiths. Like you go to people's bedsides and you have to pray with whoever you end up with, even though you don't necessarily know their language of prayer. And there are a lot of different prayer languages. I remember there was one case where I went to a bedside and I tried to offer a spontaneous prayer, and the family all looked at me like I was crazy, and then began a prayer about how their loved one was the blood. They were the blood, and they get the devil away and get the devil away, and that they were the blood, and all of this stuff. And I was like, oh, I did not know. I did not know that was the way that, wow, I had no idea that was so, but they experienced that as deeply, deeply powerful. And so my experience going, patient to patient was one of sort of a crash course in what kinds of prayers are supportive and affirming for people. But obviously prayer does not work for everyone. And there are a lot of people for whom it really doesn't work. So I want to tell you a story. I got a page. This was one of the nights that I was on call. And then in that time, during the daytime, you can have your choice of chaplains. You can pick a Jewish chaplain, or you can pick a Christian chaplain, or a Catholic chaplain, or a imam. But at night, once everybody goes home, you just get whoever's on call. So I was the lucky on-call person in this moment, and I got called to the bedside of someone who had a bunch of stuff going on. They were in an intense situation, and they were not likely to survive. They were, trying to decide between continuing treatment or moving on to hospice, but it was not looking good. And the reason I was called was because the relatives were getting irritated. And so I get this call, go to room such and such on such and such floor. And I get there, and immediately the relatives all spew out of the room and they say, oh, thank God you're here. You have to talk sense into her. Annie is going crazy. She keeps saying that there are angels in the ceiling. You have to tell her she's mad. She's lost it. Just tell her there are no angels in the ceiling. What is she talking about? The angels, and they're going on and on. And I'm thinking like, well, this is a terrible situation. Like, there's no winning when you walk into the room and there's somebody who's having a profound spiritual experience and their family wants to talk them back into reality. Like, there's no winning as a chaplain. So I'm a little bit filled with trepidation, and I open the door, and there's a woman lying in the bed, and I walk up to her bed and I say, hello, my name is Aliza. I'm the chaplain on call. And she says, oh, I'm so glad you're here. Look. And she points up towards the ceiling. And I look up towards the ceiling. And I see light fixtures and I see the ceiling. But I'm thinking like, this person is like at the end of her life. What does she have left? I mean, she's stuck in this hospital room. I'm not about to dash her magical. She's having a profound magical experience. I'm not going to be the kind of person that just like squashes it. So I say to her, like, tell me about what you're seeing. And she says, oh, there's an angel. And she's looking at me and she's blessing me. And her family members behind her are like, this is ridiculous. What kind of a chaplain are you? You have to talk sense into her. What are you doing? Mom, it's not an angel. Stop it. And I'm like, can you just give us a minute? We're just going to be present with what she's experiencing. Just give us a minute. So I sit with her, and she describes this gorgeous, gorgeous woman in the light who's looking down at her and blessing her and extending hands in love. And the family is like barely holding it together. And they're like at regular points being like, stop this. We didn't call you to talk with her about it. We called you to talk sense into her. And I'm thinking like, you called the chaplain to talk sense into her? Like, do you know what we do? But that's irrelevant. I'm just trying to work with the situation. It's a crazy situation. Finally, a nurse comes in And the nurse walks in to do some IV stuff. You know, there's various stuff they have to do at regular intervals, and she's in there working, and she overhears our conversation, and the nurse says, "Oh, did you see the angel on the ceiling?" And the patient said, "Yeah." And she says, "Yeah, everyone sees her when they're in this room," and walks out of the door. And it was this wild moment where the family, who did not believe me and was not willing for me to include the possibility of greater spirituality, were kind of shocked into silence for a moment that every single person in this room had a profound spiritual experience. So I have this active question of what has happened to the Jewish people. Is, you know, my own experience of talking about God and talking about prayer in Jewish community is we are kind of like that family in a lot of ways, where we are, and maybe this is a function of our history, that we are so burned by anti-Semitism, and not just anti-Semitism, by traumatic attacks and pogroms and by the Shoah, that we have talked ourselves out of spiritual possibilities and talked ourselves out of a relationship with God in which God can take an active role. And that's not something that's true of our Christian brothers and sisters. That's not something that's true there. You know, if you go to a church, if you have a spontaneous prayer session with the pastor, the kind of prayer that you get is much more, you know, God, do this for me. God, be with me. God, change my world. God, I need you. God, I need your presence. Help me. And in a way that we do, you know, we do the ancient words that we don't fully understand, that we recite ad nauseum. We do, you know, I'm not sure about this. And I wonder what would happen, or if that's even a possibility for us. I would love to hear how this is striking you as we're having this conversation. Go for it, Dixie. Yes.
May I ask you a personal question?
Feel free. Yes.
I am wondering, do you believe in the external God who plays a role in human nature or human being history, and that you personally appeal to that external God? And do you pray in that way, expecting a reply or hoping for a reply?
Yeah. So the answer is definitely yes. That's definitely something that I have done since something that my parents very much instilled in me since I was a very little girl. We had regular prayer, you know, every night before bed. And my mom is also she's somebody who's like goes through her day having a conversation with God. And so that's something that I learned from her. I definitely feel that. And it's definitely something that's challenging. I mean, I feel daily challenged by it, especially in the past couple of years. You know, one of the things that Solomon and I have done for these past couple of years is we've continued the prayer practice that Jeremy Battle taught us, and we pray together. And that's been true when we're just praying, and that's true also as we're going through fertility stuff. We, you know, before I take my drugs, we hold them together and we ask God to have these drugs have an effect, have their, you know, the intended effect. And it's both a moment where I feel deeply connected to God, and also it hasn't yet had the you know, the result that I would like it to have. And so there's this place where I hold both truths, right? One truth, which is I deeply believe that God is present and able to help and with me. And I've certainly noticed, you know, in our partnership that when we offer these prayers together, it changes our reality. It changes our ability. It fills us with strength. And at the same time, right, we're not just praying because, like, you know, gee, God, we'd like to feel close to you. We really are praying like we want the result that we want. And that has yet to be. And so that holding both truths is someplace where I feel like I'm often at. And I don't, you know, this is very much a thinking state conversation for me, because who knows? I don't know what would be maybe a better way of doing this. I do know it's profoundly impactful for me and helpful for me. And it's also challenging. Paul, I see your hand.
In terms of this patient at the hospital, I don't think it's the purpose of visitors or family to tell a patient what they see or don't see. This patient was seeing something that she's probably dying. And even if she isn't dying, she is seeing it. And it's comforting to her. So why should family members try to impose their will upon her? So I would say just what that nurse said. I mean, that was absolutely brilliant. She's obviously had experience with it, you know, but she's had other people see the same thing. And a lot of that has to do with the patient's prior experience with the church or synagogue or whatever institution. So I would say it's wonderful for the patient, and the family should just hold back.
Thank you, Paul. Susan, I see your hand.
Sorry, I have laryngitis. No COVID, no COVID. I detest laryngitis. I agree with you. I find the power of prayer very much a part of my day. And I don't know if it comes from your upbringing. I did say prayers with my mother at night before I went to bed. Also, just for well-being of everybody. God bless you, everybody, blah, 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 blah. You go through your list. We didn't sit at the bedside like a movie, but I agree with you. And I feel that I've had experiences. My husband says it's psychic, not a spiritual one, where I actually reflect, like you say. You can call it God, you can call it whatever you want, you know, put any name to it, but I call it God. And I kind of go into my own little solitude. So I very much agree with what you're saying. And I do think in couples, it's really important. When my daughter got married, it was an intermarriage, and she got married through the intermarriage network. That also made them pray together, made them go to a mikveh together. And I think it brought a little bit, and I think it's something that they take with them every single day in their marriage. So just for what it's worth, I agree with you, and I think it's a very powerful place in our lives, and more people should take those moments. You can call it, some people might call it Jewish meditation now. I live in Seattle, so it's Jewish meditation. And so, yes, to introduce myself, I'm Steve Kalshmiro's sister. So, yeah, that's where I am. And thank you for this. I think it's important for people to go beyond our five senses. Let's put it that way. There is a sixth sense.
Susan, thank you so much for sharing and for sharing so beautifully. And I'm so glad to hear that your daughter and son-in-law are able to connect in that way and have had that powerful experience. I know it's been a really wonderful thing for Solomon and for me together. I would love to hear, yes, we go for it, Maddie.
I really hadn't thought much about personal prayer until this conversation. I think I probably subconsciously pray a lot during the week. I couldn't tell you exactly when, but I know that I specifically pray when I light my candles on Friday night. And I'm thinking now about what that prayer is, and it's changed drastically. And it's changed drastically in the last couple of years. I don't ask for any big things. I really ask for a week at a time. And I just ask that my family stay safe and healthy in the coming week. And that just gives me a sense of comfort. And it makes me feel like I can get through the week till the next time I light the candles. And I really hadn't thought much about that till we had this discussion today. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much, Maddie, for sharing. I love that tradition of lighting the candles and sending the light to those that you love, and hoping that it will keep them for this next week, and of allowing that prayer to keep you present in this moment and also enable you to send out hopes for a better moment. Mimi, do you have your hand up? Go for it. But you'll have to unmute. Let me see if I can do it. Go for it, Mimi.
Can you hear me? Because
We
I don't know
can,
how
yeah.
to do all this. But it's a wonderful discussion. But I agree with Maddie. That is how I pray on Friday night over my candles. But having related to what you're going through, I have a little story of my daughter who couldn't conceive and for 5 years. And when my husband was finally told that he was a Mass General, that he, I'm sorry, Brigham and Women's, that he had pancreatic cancer, and this is over 30 years ago, 33 years ago, that same day, my daughter came in with a smile with her husband that they were carrying, she was carrying twins. And my prayers were answered because my husband, after my mother and my father died of pancreatic, my prayers were answered because my husband, I believe, was granted this miracle from God to see his twinsies, for 2 years, every single day. He had wonderful days and difficult days, but he saw his twinsies for 2 years. That never happened. You had 6 months, you died in 6 months. You had 3 months, my mother, she died in 3 months. Even Rabbi Shia said to me, the prayer is powerful. We pray for others. And so I have many instances of that. And I have instances of being angry at God after I lost my mother, my father, and my husband. Then it set in, I was angry. And I didn't go back to temple. I still prayed, I still lit my candles, but I didn't go back. But I too was brought up the way you were, and luckily. And I wanted that comfort again. And it all came back to me. And I had the community. And I believe this class, the way you have taught it, is just marvelous as always.
Oh, Mimi, thank you. And thank you so much for sharing so beautifully about the power of prayer in action, for your beloved getting to be with his twinsies for 2 years, and in the way that you are really honest and willing to share about your real experience with God and with prayer in all of these moments where you've had ups where you feel close and downs where you feel more distant, and the journey through it all. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I know that this is a vulnerable topic, so I just want to invite, if there's anyone who would like to share in our last couple of minutes, something that you're thinking about differently as a result of our time together today. What's one thing, what's one tidbit that you're taking with you to put in your pocket as you figuratively walk out this Zoom door in a few minutes? Go for it, Linda.
I just think it's really interesting and helpful to hear other people, and that there are some people we may recognize their face, but, we don't really get a chance to talk to them about anything significant. And it's, I love it when you're running the class. It's really nice. It's a different perspective. I'm not saying I don't like the other ones, but, each person brings something, different to it. And I can't deny that I've also always been, tried to support women in any way. I was the people know from the book groups and others, I was the first woman in a lot of different things during my career in college, and have always supported women. So I love you. I'm glad that
I love you too, Linda. Thank you, thank you, thank
glad that you came, and it's also wonderful, to have a different perspective, and to hear different voices and different comments.
Thank you so much for sharing. It's so beautiful. Other tidbits people are walking away with, taking home with them for today. All right, so since we're talking about the power of prayer, I'm going to end with a prayer. And my prayer is this: sweet, loving Lord, you have given us the blessing of getting to learn Torah together. You've given us the blessing of getting to go through these texts that seem to us as totally foreign universes, that there are realities that we cannot even comprehend. And Lord, we pray that you will help us today and all days, that you will be with us and enable us to connect to you in ways that enrich our lives and in ways that open our hearts, in ways that deepen our mind and our connection to Torah. May you bless us that we should feel close to you and empowered by you to go out into this world and do works of love and healing and grace. May we be a blessing for your name's sake. And for this we say together, Amen.
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 Thank you all so much for joining this class. Such a joy to get to learn with you. And I look forward to seeing you soon.